The mud hadn't frozen yet. That was the first mistake. At approximately 0540 on a late autumn morning, 16 Russian T-72B3 and T-80 BVM tanks rolled off a staging road north of Lyman and entered a belt of mixed pine and birch forest that Russian planners had marked on their maps as covered approach terrain. Behind the tanks came 6 BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles carrying dismounted infantry who were never ordered to dismount. The column moved in single file along a logging track approximately 4 meters wide, the only hardened surface through the tree line that could bear the weight of a main battle tank in wet ground. The Ukrainian 25th Airborne Brigade had been waiting inside that tree line for 11 days. Over the next 40 minutes, 13 of those 16 tanks would stop moving permanently. The 6 BMPs would fare no better, and the officer who ordered the assault would spend the following week filing casualty reports that contradicted every pre-battle confidence assessment his unit had submitted. This is the story of how a forested belt outside Lyman became one of the most efficient anti-armor engagements of 2024. Ukrainian forces turned terrain that Russian planners considered an asset into a precisely engineered trap. And the same doctrinal failure, column assault through uncleared terrain, infantry kept mounted, no forward screening, keeps producing the same catastrophic result, engagement after engagement, season after season. How does a force with satellite reconnaissance, electronic warfare assets, and weeks of operational planning walk 16 tanks into a prepared kill sack in broad daylight? And why, after 3 years of this war proving the answer over and over again, does Russia keep making the same choice? The Lyman axis had been contested since the city's liberation by Ukrainian forces in October 2022. Situated at the junction of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, Lyman sits atop road and rail networks that feed the entire eastern front. Russian forces had been probing the approaches through the Zherebets River Valley and the forested terrain northeast of the city for months, testing Ukrainian defensive lines with company and battalion-sized actions that repeatedly stalled against prepared positions. By autumn 2024, Russian operational planners were under pressure to demonstrate progress on the Kupiansk-Lyman axis. The broader Donetsk front had consumed enormous materiel. Oryx open-source tracking had confirmed over 4,000 Russian armored vehicle losses across the war by this point. And the general staff in Moscow was rotating formations through the axis, hoping to find a weakness in the Ukrainian line. The specific tree line in question runs roughly 3 kilometers northeast of the village of Torska, which had itself changed hands multiple times. The forest belt, approximately 800 meters deep and 2 kilometers wide, sits on gently rolling terrain that channels movement onto the single logging track the Russian column would use. On either side of that track, the ground drops into soft, seasonal drainage gullies that become impassable for heavy vehicles after the first autumn rains. The 25th Airborne Brigade, operating in coordination with elements of the 14th Separate Special Forces Detachment, had conducted detailed terrain analysis of this approach corridor beginning in late September. Ukrainian forward observers confirmed through multiple reconnaissance passes, both ground-level observation and Mavic 3T thermal drone flights at night, that Russian mechanized elements were staging north of the wood line. The pattern was consistent with a planned armored push, timed to coincide with a broader Russian offensive effort along the Kremina-Svatov line to the north. What the Russian column commander did not know was that his approach route had been studied for over a month. Every turn in the logging track had been mapped. The drainage gullies on either flank had been measured and marked as vehicle traps. And 11 days before the assault, Ukrainian combat engineers had moved through the forest at night and emplaced a layered obstacle system that would define the outcome of the engagement before the first shot was fired. Russia had a column. Ukraine had a kill sack. That difference determined everything. The intelligence picture that shaped Ukrainian preparations was built from multiple overlapping sources. Drone reconnaissance from the 414th UAV Brigade, the unit associated with the Magyar Birds call sign group, had been flying the staging area north of the tree line for 3 weeks. Thermal footage collected between 02 and 04 local time on multiple nights showed increasing vehicle concentrations at 2 assembly points. A tree-screened field position approximately 2 kilometers north of the wood line, and a secondary staging area along a farm track to the northeast, where fuel trucks and ammunition resupply vehicles had been observed. Ukrainian signals intelligence units monitoring Russian tactical radio frequencies in the sector detected an increase in encrypted burst transmissions beginning approximately 72 hours before the assault. Russian forces in this period of the war were still using a mix of Motorola commercial radios and older military R-168 sets, and the volume and timing of communications traffic provided indicators that a coordinated action was being planned. Intercepted communications fragments, partial plain language transmissions picked up before operators switched to encrypted channels, referenced unit movement timings and the logging track by a designator that Ukrainian analysts cross-referenced with their terrain mapping. A Ukrainian forward observer element, positioned in a damaged farm structure on the eastern edge of the forest, provided visual confirmation on the evening before the assault. The observer reported an increase in engine activity from the northern staging area and the movement of at least 6 tanks from the secondary assembly point to join the primary concentration. That report reached brigade headquarters and triggered the final activation of the Ukrainian defensive plan. The anti-armor network that the 25th Airborne had constructed inside the tree line was built around 3 reinforcing elements. First, the mine obstacle system. Combat engineers had emplaced TM-62 anti-tank mines at 3 choke points along the logging track, specifically targeting the approach to each of 2 significant bends where vehicles would be forced to slow and where the track narrowed further. The mines were laid in clusters rather than linear patterns, designed to disable rather than immediately destroy lead vehicles, creating blocking obstacles that would trap the vehicles immediately behind them. Second, a set of ATGM firing positions had been established at the western and eastern edges of the tree line. The 25th Airborne was equipped with a mix of Stugna-P and Corsair man-portable anti-tank guided missiles, both domestically produced Ukrainian systems with effective ranges between 400 and 5,000 meters. The Stugna-P in particular, with its semi-automatic laser beam riding guidance and tandem charge warhead capable of penetrating 800 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor behind explosive reactive armor, had proven lethal against T-72 variants throughout the war. 4 Stugna-P teams were positioned along the wood line, each pre-designated a fire sector covering specific sections of the logging track. They had registered their aiming points against reference markers established during daylight reconnaissance. In the dark, at the moment of assault, there would be no adjustment required. They already knew exactly where the tanks would be. Third, Ukrainian artillery units, specifically a battery from the 55th Artillery Brigade equipped with 2 S-7 Pion self-propelled guns and a separate element operating M777 howitzers, had pre-plotted fire missions onto the logging track and the vehicle with cleared areas at the track's northern entry point. Drone operators from the UAV element attached to the 25th Airborne had been assigned specific observation sectors and were briefed to call corrections as soon as the column entered the wood line. The fire missions were pre-approved. The decision cycle had been compressed to seconds. The detail that stands out in the battle reconstruction: the entire Ukrainian kill sack had been prepared, registered, and rehearsed while the Russian column was still staging. By the time the first T-72B3 moved onto the logging track at approximately 0540, every Ukrainian element was already in position, already waiting, already watching. The column was already inside the trap before it crossed the start line. The column entered the tree line in standard Russian mechanized formation for this period of the war. Tanks forward, BMPs to the rear, carrying infantry who remained buttoned up inside the vehicles. No forward dismounted reconnaissance element preceded the lead tank. No flank security had been pushed into the forest on either side of the track. The lead vehicle was a T-72B3 equipped with Contact 5 explosive reactive armor, moving at approximately 15 to 20 kilometers per hour on the logging track. The first mine detonation occurred at 0547, approximately 340 meters inside the wood line. The TM-62 cluster caught the lead tank's left track at the first major bend in the logging track, blowing the track assembly and immobilizing the vehicle. The T-72B3 slewed left and came to rest, partially blocking the track. The hull tilted at a slight angle against the drainage ditch on the left side. The crew was not immediately killed. The mine was designed to stop, not destroy, but the tank was combat ineffective and blocking the only viable route forward. The column stopped. What happened in the next 4 minutes would determine everything. The Russian column commander had a decision to make. He could order his vehicles to reverse and withdraw. He could attempt to push the immobilized lead tank into the drainage ditch using the tank immediately behind it. Or he could wait, assess, and call for supporting fires to suppress what might be a Ukrainian ambush position. He chose none of these options quickly enough. Ukrainian drone operators observed the column halting on their Mavic 3T feeds and immediately relayed the position confirmation to artillery fire control. The pre-plotted fire missions activated. Simultaneously, the 4 Stugna-P teams registered the stalled column in their sights. The first Stugna-P launch came at 0551. The missile crossed the 600-meter engagement distance in under 4 seconds and struck the second tank in the column, a T-80BVM, on the turret ring, detonating its tandem warhead against the vehicle's side armor, where the Contact 5 coverage was incomplete. The T-80BVM's ammunition began cooking off within 30 seconds, the secondary explosions tearing the turret partially free and lighting the surrounding trees in the pre-dawn darkness. The burning T-80BVM now created a second blocking obstacle, accompanied by a column of fire and smoke that served as an aiming reference for every subsequent engagement. Artillery correction came at 0553. An M777 battery fired a 6-round adjustment mission onto the northern entry point of the logging track, targeting vehicles 4 through 7 in the column, the section of tanks that remained mobile but had nowhere to go. 2 155mm shells landed within 15 meters of the track on the first adjustment. The Ukrainian fire control operator, working from real-time drone video feed, called a 50-meter correction left and added range. The second fire mission landed across the track itself. Tank 3, attempting to push around the burning T-80BVM, drove its right track into the drainage ditch during the artillery impact sequence and became stuck. Its commander opened the hatch, which was the last decision he made in that engagement. By 13 minutes after the lead tank hit the mine, the column had effectively ceased to exist as a maneuvering formation. The logging track was blocked at 2 points. Artillery was impacting along the column's entire length. 4 Stugna-P teams were selecting targets from their pre-established positions, and the 6 BMPs at the rear of the column, which could theoretically have reversed and extracted, were themselves now under fire from a 5th ATGM position that Ukrainian forces had established covering the track's northern exit point, held in reserve for exactly this contingency. The infantry inside the BMPs had a choice: stay mounted and absorb the incoming fire, or dismount into a forest that Ukrainian forces controlled. The vehicles that attempted to back up along the track encountered the artillery impact zone. Most stayed mounted. What strikes us about this engagement is not the tactical skill involved, though that was considerable. It is how completely predictable the outcome was once the column entered the wood line without forward reconnaissance. Ukrainian forces did not have to improvise anything after 0540. They executed a plan they had rehearsed against a scenario that Russian forces handed them without deviation. Every Russian decision, column formation, no dismounted screen, no flank security, no immediate reversal after the first mine strike, matched the Ukrainian planning assumption precisely. This was not a close battle. It was a scheduled event. The battle damage assessment, reconstructed from multiple drone footage sets published on Ukrainian military social channels and cross-referenced against Oryx open-source vehicle identification, accounts for the following confirmed losses: 11 T-72B3 and T-80BVM main battle tanks destroyed or rendered combat ineffective within the tree line, 2 additional tanks damaged at the northern approach while attempting to hold position outside the wood line, and 5 of the 6 BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed or abandoned. 1 tank and 1 BMP-2 successfully reversed out of the engagement zone. The single tank by driving through the ditch and across soft ground that held the vehicle's weight. The BMP by reversing at high speed before the northern exit became fully engaged. Total confirmed vehicle losses: 13 armored vehicles destroyed, 2 additional tanks damaged. Dollar value of destroyed equipment at estimated unit replacement cost, approximately $47 million, based on figures drawn from Russian defense procurement data and Western intelligence assessments of T-72B3 modernization cost at roughly $2.2 million per vehicle, and BMP-2 replacement value at approximately $1.2 million per vehicle. The infantry losses were harder to confirm precisely from open-source material, but Ukrainian military reporting cited in subsequent General Staff updates referenced significant personnel casualties consistent with the loss of BMP-2 vehicles with full crew and infantry complements. Each BMP-2 in this configuration carries a crew of 3 and up to 8 dismounted infantry. If 5 BMP-2s were lost with personnel aboard, the personnel casualty figure would be in the range of 30 to 50 killed or wounded. This outcome was not primarily a failure of equipment or firepower. Russia had sufficient tank assets in the region to conduct this assault. The T-72B3 and T-80BVM are capable platforms that have demonstrated survivability in other engagements when used correctly. This was a failure of doctrine and command culture, the persistent inability or unwillingness of Russian tactical commanders to execute the basic combined arms procedures that their own field manuals require before committing armor to restrictive terrain. The Russian Army's doctrinal guidance on armor employment in wooded terrain calls explicitly for forward reconnaissance by dismounted infantry, flank security elements to prevent envelopment, and sequential clearing of approach routes before committing main battle tanks. These procedures exist precisely because the Russian military fought in forests extensively in the Second World War and codified the lessons of those engagements. The doctrine is not absent. It is simply not being followed. And the question worth asking in the comments, the one with no easy answer, is why? Is this a failure of junior officer training, producing company and battalion commanders who have never actually practiced combined arms coordination? Is it pressure from higher headquarters to demonstrate movement and progress, creating incentives to rush rather than clear? Is it a culture of top-down command that discourages initiative at the level where these decisions actually get made? Probably all three, in proportions that vary by unit and commander. Drop your assessment in the comments. Serious answers only. This question matters beyond one engagement. The aftermath unfolded in the hours that followed. Russian forces north of the tree line did not attempt a follow-on assault. Intercepted communications in the tactical frequency band for the sector, monitored by Ukrainian signals intelligence, reflected what analysts described as a period of communications confusion. Multiple elements reporting different assessments of the column's status, requests for clarification about whether withdrawal was authorized, and at least one exchange that Ukrainian SIGINT personnel characterized as a command-level argument about responsibility for the outcome. Russian military bloggers operating in the Telegram ecosystem, the semi-official information space where Russian sources report battlefield events with varying accuracy, acknowledged significant vehicle losses in the Torska direction within hours of the engagement, framing the outcome as a tactical setback caused by Ukrainian ambush positions rather than as a doctrinal failure. The satellite imagery that Maxar Technologies published of the tree line area in the 48 hours following the engagement shows the burn scars of destroyed vehicles at multiple points along the logging track, consistent with the Ukrainian battle damage assessment. The heat signatures from burning vehicles were visible in the thermal band imagery for over 6 hours after the engagement ended, the ammunition cook-off continuing well after the crew activity had ceased. For the Ukrainian 25th Airborne Brigade, the engagement was a successful execution of a prepared defense concept that the brigade had refined across multiple engagements in the Lyman-Torsky corridor. The combination of engineer obstacles, pre-positioned ATGM fires, drone-cued artillery, and kill-sack geometry had been applied to the specific terrain and the specific threat profile. Brigade-level sources, cited in Ukrainian General Staff reporting, confirmed that no significant Ukrainian casualties occurred during the engagement itself. The prepared positions allowed Ukrainian forces to engage from protected firing points without exposing personnel to direct fire. The week that followed saw Russian forces on the Lyman axis shift their operational focus to a different approach corridor, attempting smaller probes by 1 to 2 vehicle elements rather than the massed column assault. Those probes encountered Ukrainian observation and FPV drone coverage that limited their effectiveness, but they did not produce the catastrophic material losses of the column engagement. The shift in Russian tactics toward dispersed smaller elements rather than concentrated columns reflected an adaptation to the immediate lesson of the engagement, though Ukrainian defensive preparations along the axis were adjusted in parallel. The detail that stayed with us in the reconstruction: the Ukrainian mine layout was positioned at the bends in the logging track, not at the entry point. A Russian forward reconnaissance element. Even a single dismounted soldier moving 200 meters ahead of the lead tank would have found the mines before they found the mines. The decision not to dismount that soldier, or not to order that dismount, or not to have a command culture that made that dismount automatic. That single absence of a routine tactical procedure was the actual cause of 13 vehicle losses and the deaths of somewhere between 30 and 50 Russian soldiers. What do you think? Was this a failure of the individual column commander, or does the accountability go higher to the officers who planned and approved a massed armor assault on an uncleared forest track? The answer shapes how you think about whether this changes. If you have been following the Lyman corridor through our coverage, you already know the pattern. This was not the first time Russian armor attempted a column assault through forested terrain on this axis. In the spring and summer engagements documented in our previous analysis, similar column formations were stopped by similar obstacle and ATGM combinations at different points along the same general approach corridors. The terrain north of Lyman, with its drainage-channeled movement corridors and seasonal mud that restricts off-road movement by heavy vehicles, has functioned as a persistent equalizer, removing the numerical advantage that Russian forces possess in tank inventory and applying it against the Ukrainian advantage in prepared defense, drone reconnaissance, and ATGM employment. If this analysis is holding your attention, and based on the engagement record it should, subscribe now. The OSINT reconstruction pipeline we run produces this level of detailed battle analysis weekly, and the Lyman axis is far from finished as a story. The doctrinal implications of the engagement extend beyond the immediate tactical result. The Russian military entered this war with a combined arms doctrine that, on paper, addressed the specific vulnerabilities this engagement exploited: forward reconnaissance, flank security, sequential terrain clearing, dismounted infantry as the lead element in restrictive terrain. These procedures were all in the playbook. 3 years of combat have not produced systematic doctrinal adaptation at the tactical level. Individual units have learned and adapted in localized ways, but the institutional pattern of massed column assault in uncleared terrain persists across formations and across time. The Oryx confirmed armor loss figures tell this story statistically. Over 4,000 Russian armored vehicles destroyed or captured since February 2022, with a significant percentage of those losses concentrated in exactly the scenario type seen at Lyman: column movement in channeled terrain without forward reconnaissance against prepared Ukrainian defensive positions. The aggregate lesson of those 4,000 vehicles is the same lesson encoded in Russian doctrine from 1943. Armor without combined arm support in restrictive terrain is a target delivery system, not a breakthrough force. The Ukrainian side has its own doctrinal evolution to acknowledge. The prepared kill sack outside Lyman is a mature application of what Ukrainian forces have developed across 3 years of combat: the integration of commercial drone reconnaissance, pre-planned fire missions, engineer obstacles, and crew-served ATGM fires into a coherent defensive system that can be prepared in days and executed in minutes. The 25th Airborne Brigade, the 414th UAV Brigade, and the artillery elements that cooperated in this engagement are not improvising. They are executing a doctrine that has been tested, refined, and validated across hundreds of engagements. That doctrinal maturity on the Ukrainian side, developed not in peacetime exercises, but in the actual kill zones of Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, is a genuine military capability that did not exist at the same level in February 2022. It is the compounding return on 3 years of combat experience paid for at enormous human cost. The 16 tanks that rolled north of Lyman at 0540 on a wet autumn morning did not encounter a superior force. They encountered a superior method. And the difference between those two things, between raw material capability and the doctrine and discipline to employ it effectively, is the central lesson that this engagement, like dozens before it and likely dozens after it, keeps making. Could Russia have prevented this specific outcome? Yes, with a routine tactical procedure that takes 20 minutes and costs nothing. Does that answer make the pattern better or worse? Think about that. Because if the solution is that simple and it keeps not being applied, the explanation is not ignorance. It is something more structural, more resistant to correction, and more consequential for every subsequent engagement on every axis where Russian armor moves into terrain that Ukrainian forces have had time to prepare. How does this change the calculus for NATO planners studying Russian armored doctrine for a potential Article 5 scenario? The engagement outside Lyman is a data point in a pattern, and the pattern suggests that the Russian combined arms execution failure is not a war-specific phenomenon. It predates Ukraine in Chechnya and Syria. It persists despite those precedents. NATO defensive planning along the eastern flank in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland relies heavily on terrain channeling and prepared anti-armor defense, and the Lyman engagement validates those planning assumptions in real-time conditions against real Russian formations. And what is the next Ukrainian target on the Lyman axis? The approach corridors north of the city are finite. The terrain analysis that shaped the kill sack outside Torsky applies equally to 2 other forest belts that channel movement toward Lyman from the northeast. Ukrainian forces have had months to study those belts as well. The question is not whether Russian forces will attempt another massed armor push in this direction. The operational pressure to demonstrate progress on the axis has not diminished, but whether the tactical procedure on the Russian side will change before the next column reaches the next set of mines. The failure mode is not new. Armor committed to restrictive terrain without dismounted reconnaissance, channeled onto a single approach route, destroyed in sequence as the column stalls. This is visible in the Ardennes in 1944, in the Ia Drang Valley in 1965, in the First Battle of Grozny in 1994. Each time, the tactical lesson was codified. Each time, the next force to ignore it paid the same price. Do you think this pattern breaks, Or does the structural pressure toward massed armor commitment in the face of time pressure always override the doctrinal lessons? Leave that in the comments. It is the question that the rubble of 13 armored vehicles in a forest outside Lyman is asking. 13 tanks and 5 infantry fighting vehicles. Approximately $47 million in destroyed equipment, somewhere between 30 and 50 soldiers who did not return from a forest that their commanders told them was covered approach terrain. The logging track is still there. The drainage ditches are still channeling movement to the same bend where the first mine detonated. The forest belt is still intact, still offering the same visual cover that made it look like an asset on a Russian planning map. And somewhere north of that tree line, another Russian formation is looking at that same terrain feature on the same kind of map. Subscribe to Frontline Truth for weekly OSINT-driven battle reconstructions from the Ukraine front. The next analysis in this series examines the Robotine corridor and the engineering obstacles that have defined movement there through the autumn and winter cycle. The pattern, when you see it, will be familiar.